Hi, my name is Nancy Love, and I am or was trying to found the Planet Peace Project. I've been crying because I just found out that long-term U.S. Congress Representative John Lewis is facing a serious illness, and I just want to say that, by God, sir, since I can't imagine a world without you, then you've got to stick and stay until I'm ready to go, and that'll be a long time. So we gotta get you well so that you can keep fighting the good fight. As Maury Maverick's family said, fight the good fight. Um, John Lewis, if you're living on Mars and don't know who the heck he is, was one of the original 13 freedom fighters. John Lewis, as a very young man, showed tremendous courage and started, like my friend in San Antonio, William Sinkin, to desegregate lunch counters in restaurants in the 1950s. Bill Sinkin, who was a white guy, used to walk into restaurants in San Antonio. John will appreciate this. This guy would, a little guy with a bow tie, who'd walk in to restaurants, segregated restaurants in San Antonio, with black men and sit down and expect the restaurant to serve them both, just like they were both anybody. Well, that was extremely controversial and very scary for the bigoted restaurant owners there, but they had to serve Bill Sinkin and his guest, whoever that guest might be. Why? Because William Sinkin was the banker who had approved their business loan. Well, John Lewis was a black man, and he had to have a lot of courage to do what he did, working to desegregate America. The Freedom Riders were people who sat together in buses because in those appallingly backward days, black and white people weren't supposed to sit together in buses. What a species. And the people who started doing that were getting beaten, threatened with death. At one point, a bus was surrounded, and there was a threat that it would be burned. And it's that kind of thing. And if you've been alive only a short time and you have no memory of such events, you need to hit that history book because those were some appallingly stupid times for any sane person to have to live through. And John Lewis was there. He was a friend to Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and some of the major dudes and dudettes of that era. And there's not a human being alive I love and respect more. I need to tell him something, and I hope his staff is able to relay this or tell him to look at this link and to hear this message. John Lewis helped me board a bus in Los Angeles this summer. John Lewis was on the other side of the continent at the time. How could he help some tall, white, disabled? Got this wheelchair thing happening here. So you're going to ask, how did John Lewis help you board the bus, Nancy? Well, here's how. First of all, I did a wonderful essay about Rosa Parks called The Day Dignity Changed the World. Rosa Parks was one of my heroes when I was a child, a little blonde white kid growing up in West Texas. I used to do what I called courage training. And I'd go back and sit in the backyard and I would pretend to be her. And I'd imagine being the same soul but dropped into a different body. And I was a small black woman and had been just stupidly treated for so many years, and to have the courage, have the presence of spirit, and the just the plain old out there godliness to lift your chin and square your shoulders and say the words that she said to the big sheriff or police guy or whoever who was packing a gun and was twice as big as she was and had the authority to kill her. That man could have killed her and gotten away with it, and we all know that. But she sat there alone at the front of the bus and she said, "No, I will not be moved. No, I will not be moved." And that was the day that history began to change for bus desegregation in the United States of America. That's why I call it the day dignity changed the world, and that's why I call me sitting in the backyard pretending to be Rosa Parks and having that much spunk was called courage. I was also trying to start something called the Planet Peace Project, as I mentioned, and that was inspired on Martin Luther King Day, January 15th of the year 2004. When I was praying, and then I said, "God, if the oversoul of Martin Luther King could still hear me, could you let me talk directly to him?" So imagine praying directly to the oversoul of Martin Luther King and said, "We need you. I personally need your guidance in terms of peaceful non-resistance and having the courage to stand up to power, but gracefully and with dignity and rationale so that they're less likely to kill you when you do stand up." Now I can't stand at all. Go figure. And then when I opened my eyes from imagining that I was talking to Martin Luther King, I just wrote this poem called Planet Peace. And I saw that it had great power. I I then said, how can these words, however beautiful, actually go out into the world and help create the reality they describe? And then all of a sudden, just full blown, I had this idea for something with education, mediation, volunteer training, advocacy training, celebration of the arts. I had this great idea for this nonprofit that circumstances and calamities and so forth have yet to allow me to start. So I say that to say this. I am not a person known for bigotry. I am a person known for racial tolerance and embracing all. Now that I'm handicapped and I'm disabled and travel around in a wheelchair, I've been really astonished at how people see the surface and don't realize that I'm exactly the same person. I'm still the same person with an intellect, with an education, decades of business experience, professionalism, and I'm just seen as some old disabled lady now. People just write me off and discredit me on sight because I'm in a wheelchair, and I find that very, very upsetting and unfortunate because, hey, they're missing out. It's their loss if they can't see that I'm exactly the same person I was before I had to sit down all the time. So here I did go into a bus near the intersection of Slauson and Crenshaw, a mostly black neighborhood in Los Angeles. And it was the first time I'd used the bus in a long time. At that time, I didn't get out much. And oh boy, am I out a lot now, unfortunately. But when I rolled my wheelchair on the bus, there was already a black lady over to the left in a wheelchair, and the bus can only accommodate 2 wheelchairs at a time. And they have to ask folks who can walk to get up out of the seat so they can turn the seat up, right? And then you can scoot the wheelchair in that empty space. Well, there were a couple of people. The bus was pretty much full, and I didn't care that I noticed that it was all black people. And there were a couple of people who got up right away when this person needed to get on. But there was this one man who refused to get up. And the bus driver, who was a beautiful young black woman, very kind and gracious person, and she said, I can't really like force him to get up. I've asked him to get up, and I just practically started crying. And some of the people in the back of the bus were actually taunting me and jeering at me. This is Los Angeles, and this was 2019. This is not the dark ages, man. And people were actually saying, we don't want a whitey on this bus. Why don't you catch your own bus? What are you even doing in this neighborhood? And I'm like, my God, this neighborhood is renowned for cordiality and clean cut yards and nice houses and good people and friendly neighbors. And, that neighborhood is known for as a pleasant place where people get along. And I couldn't believe that way I was being treated just because of the color of my skin and my blonde hair. And I just practically started crying. I said, look, blubber, blubber, do you know I have a YouTube video about Rosa Parks, and I wrote a beautiful essay that's been life-changing for some people called The Day Dignity Changed the World, and they didn't care. I said, well, does it matter to you that I was trying to start something called the Planet Peace Project, a nonprofit dedicated to saving your world for your children, and it was dedicated to and inspired by Martin Luther King? That didn't move him. Did you know that I was courted by the Obama White House to be a speechwriter and special analyst for foreign affairs? Even the fact that our first black president wanted me to work for him didn't move this group of people. So then I was crying, and the bus driver was just sitting there flummoxed, and this was like a mob scene. This large group of black people didn't want me on a city bus in Los Angeles. And I said, do you people realize that by the age of 5, when I watched people like John Lewis risk their very lives and get their faces bloodied and beaten to desegregate buses, that although I was a little kid 1,500 miles away, spiritually, I got on the bus with John Lewis? Because when I asked, why are these people doing this, what I was told was that when the Nazis tried to take over Germany and took all the Jews, if you weren't Jewish, you didn't do anything. And then they took the blacks, and if they weren't black, they didn't do anything. And then they took the homosexuals and the intellectuals and all these other categories of people. And if you weren't, a Jew or black or homosexual or an intellectual, you didn't do anything. The Germans just sat there and let their whole country be overtaken. And then the Nazis came for everybody else, everyone. And they would shoot you dead if you didn't have your identification papers walking down the street. They were unconscionable. By the time the Nazis came for everyone else, there was no one left to stand up for anyone at all. And that is how Hitler's reign happened on this planet. Well, lo and behold, when I mentioned John Lewis and said I was spiritually on the bus with the Freedom Riders, even though I was 5 years old and hundreds of miles away, the bus driver turned to me, she whirled on her heel, and she said, "But you said John Lewis? I love him." I said, "Yeah, I know." And she said, she turned to that man, the black man, who was much larger than she was. She was a young, smallish kind of person. And she proved she wasn't so small after all. And she just stood right into his face. He was sitting down, and she said, "If you don't get up and let this woman on the bus, I'm throwing you off the bus, not her. And the rest of you can follow him out the door. I'm disgusted with you people." That's what she said. And I said, I must have said some magic words. And she said, I'm from John Lewis's state. He was my representative when I lived there. And I love that man. So I rolled my wheelchair into the appropriate space once the resistant black man had gotten up. He decided to stay on the bus and let me on, right? And I settled into place and I thought, you know, we should have come farther by now. On the bus or off the bus. As a species, we should have come so much further by now. But with people like me trying to do planet peace, inspired by Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and Barack Obama, and all the major dudettes, and with people like John Lewis on this planet, our species will overcome. Our species will overcome stupidity, racism, judgment on sight. Our species will overcome war, both civil and across national boundaries. Our species will learn how to make this planet the garden of love that it should be. And we will stop despoiling it with our pollutants, and we will stop marking it with our bombs. Because I know, as well as many of you do, that this planet could be a playground of love, a paradise, a beautiful, beautiful garden, instead of the pockmarked bomb site we've made it. Now, I'm telling John Lewis very publicly right now, sir, you are one of my greatest heroes. And I felt that the world has been so gifted by the fact that you've endured as long as you have, and you haven't gone home, propped your feet up to watch TV. You've stayed at work long after a lot of people would have retired and maybe gone to play golf or something. Some people play golf all the time and they don't work. But not you. You tell us to have courage. You tell us to have raw courage. Mr. Lewis, beloved soul, I, Nancy Love, am telling you now. Have courage. Have raw courage. The people who love you are going to fight your fight with you. We are going to win.